Genocide and Artsakh back in 2023. So I think we're here at an important time where we have seen genocide repeated now twice within the last couple of years in this century, despite all of the warnings of the international community. And I think our goal here is to try to play some role in rectifying that by ensuring genocide education is accessible and supported and also meaningful and informed by real practice, which I think is something that Gen Ed has done a phenomenal job through its teacher training programs. So I wanted to preface it with that. Happy to answer questions later about the Genocide Education Act specifically, but this is going to be the Gen Ed show for sure. So I'm going to start with intros. Roxanne Makasdjian, the co-founder and executive director of the Genocide Education Project. She oversees the organization's educational programs, fellowship initiatives, curriculum development, comms, and partnerships with educational institutions. She's previously served as Director of Broadcast Communications at UC Berkeley and as producer at ABC Network News. And Makasdjian, Roxanne, holds a master's in journalism at UC Berkeley and a bachelor's in political science at UCLA, has been a force behind the Armenian Genocide Education Act since it was first introduced back in 2019, and has also done extensive work at the state level and local level, working with state governments from California to Nevada to develop these curricula and prepare training materials for teachers. Carrie Flynn is the Education Director for the Genocide Education Project. She brings 25 years of experience as a high school social studies educator, has taught modern U.S. history and created a human rights and genocide course at Washington High School near St. Louis, Missouri. Flynn has received University of Chicago Outstanding Educator Award in 2022 and serves as Executive Secretary of the Missouri Council for the Social Studies. She's an alumna of the Gen Ed Teacher Fellowship Program, which we'll hear about today. Has completed numerous professional development programs related to human rights, the Holocaust, other genocides, and the Second World War. And Alex Riddell is from Falls Church, Virginia, teaches World War II history, U.S. government and women's history at Marshall High School, Mount Vernon Teacher of the Year runner-up. She's also taught at the university level in Poland, has helped create women's history course for Fairfax County. So we have a stacked panel here with a lot of insight into not only what it takes to teach about genocide, but also what it takes to produce the teachers that are able to educate and impart this knowledge on the next generation. So looking forward to the presentation, and I'll let you take the rest.
Thank you, Alex. Thank you very much. Hi, everybody. Thank you to the Armenian National Committee of America for inviting us. And thank you all, Congress members, staff people, I guess that's who I'm looking at, right? Who prioritize this for today and your busy schedules. We really appreciate it. One thing I might say about the introduction was, in fact, Gen Ed, that's our nickname for the Genocide Education Project, Gen Ed. Gen Ed, I don't think we could call ourselves a powerhouse since the beginning of this bill that's been introduced, because actually it came as a surprise to us, and we were thrilled. We were thrilled to hear something like this is moving along. But maybe I could take credit for ANCA kind of starting to think more 20 years ago about the education aspect of the various bills that are related to Armenian history and Armenian genocide recognition and so forth. So I think it's a symbiotic relationship over the past 20 years. So I thought I would give you a little, tell you a little bit about just myself and this organization, which hopefully I was going to say when and if, but when or if, no, when this bill eventually passes, I can't wait for the day to do more and more of what we're already doing. I think that will be the effect of it. So my 4 grandparents were survivors, amongst the few survivors of the Armenian genocide in what is today the state of Turkey. And they made their way to the United States, and we're very, very grateful to this day for this country's welcoming of them. And this is them. This is, just the elderly woman at the center was my great-grandmother, who actually saved our entire family by learning of the fact that the Turks were coming next to their town, and gathering up all her sisters-in-law because the men were away at work, the husbands were away at work or taken away. And so it was the wives and their children left, and she was the leader who walked them east for months ahead of the Turkish soldiers who were right behind to get out of there. And so she saved our family. And by this time, they're in Davenport, Iowa, and have kids. And my mom's the one in the middle with her hand on her lap. She today turns 95 years old. So I'm going to a Zoom birthday party after I leave here. And so she was born and raised in Davenport, Iowa. And but then met my dad and came out to California, where I was born and raised. And this says a lot about my childhood in LA. It was great. It was kind of the typical what we've seen in the 1950s, 60s TV shows where, with the happy family and the kids acting like cowboys. But fast forward, I went public schools and Armenian schools, went to public university in Los Angeles, UCLA for my undergrad. Then I moved up to the Bay Area, and I've been there ever since. I got my graduate degree. So I did political science, and then I did journalism, and then I worked in TV news for many years. And in the meantime, I, was involved in the Armenian community in San Francisco, and with some advocacy work, with a lot of advocacy work in California, the legislature in California in the 80s passed a resolution directing the Department of Education to include the Armenian genocide, as it should be, in social studies curriculum. Until that time, because of many factors, including a very, very strong campaign of denial coming from the government of Turkey, the Armenian genocide was not at all adequately included in any parts of the curriculum or textbooks, okay? So the California legislature was persuaded of that, and they directed the Department of Education. And we sat back going, phew, okay, now we're rolling. Then 10 years later, I and a few of my Armenian American friends and colleagues in San Francisco said, so we assume that's been happening now in classrooms for 10 years now, since the law was passed, right? Schools must be teaching about it. So we did a survey of the school districts in the Bay Area and found that not one of them had been aware that that mandate was passed. Not one of them had been given any instruction that they now should be including this in the history curriculum. And not one teacher who we talked to was prepared, had teaching resources and preparation to teach this very difficult and sensitive topic. So that was kind of that was how Gen Ed was born. We said, well, let's help the San Francisco School District. We went to them, they said, we agree with you. We will assign our history department to work with you. You know the scholars who have been studying the Armenian genocide, etc., and you know the relevant and non-denialist, texts that we can use to create curriculum. Let's create curriculum together. So we did that for the San Francisco School District. We gave a first pilot workshop for a full day for the San Francisco Unified School District social studies teachers, and it was a huge success, I'm not shy to say. The teachers loved it, the schools loved it. They now had a binder of everything they needed, we packed into that. We first took the state standards that existed. We looked at what teachers are already supposed to be teaching, and we looked at where and how the Armenian genocide should be fit in, but wasn't. And so, because we didn't want to give teachers extra work and like an addendum to do, we wanted it to be part of that. So that's how we created it with these teachers, and we gave them step-by-step instructions in those days. There wasn't internet to easily do searches and find something that's vetted and approved. And so we gave them step-by-step instructions and homeworks and answers to the homeworks and background reading material and everything a teacher could need to feel comfortable once they got through it to teach this topic. And so moving forward now 20 years, there's actually been a fair amount of improvement across the country in how much this topic is being taught and how states have become to recognize the need for this. You know, I didn't address this issue, and I don't think I need to with this crowd, but we've come to a point in history and in education that I think it's not beyond any of us why genocide should be addressed in our schools. It is a problem that our future leaders must understand, and they must understand the patterns of genocides generally. And the Armenian case in particular was a seminal landmark case beginning of the last century, which actually fueled, and especially the continued denial of it, has fueled other genocides, even as Alex mentioned, in the Armenian case itself fueled it again, but also fueled others. And so it was, and it imagined also teaching about World War II and not mentioning the Holocaust. That's what was happening in the case of World War I education. So there are many important, relevant reasons why this particular genocide needs to be included. Of course, teachers probably cannot teach all of the genocides, but there are some seminal cases that need to have a little more heft to them in the curriculum than others. So now, when we've come to today, we note that many these states, and I think I might have missed a couple, have passed some kind of a law or included in their departments of education standards the teaching of Holocaust and genocide, and particularly mentioning the Armenian case in there as an example that needs to be taught. But again, the big question is in these states, how will teachers get what they need, get the training they need to actually carry out that? And we come across this problem everywhere in the country that we give our workshops. And so, as I mentioned, the biggest issue, the biggest first thing was educating the lawmakers about the need for this. And what we learned from the California experience was that a huge obstacle of getting that mandate carried out was the fact that there were absolutely no financial appropriations designated to create materials or to offer training. So it kind of, everything stopped right there. And so that's something that needs attention, right? This is at a hearing in California. So this is that first big binder we created. And now those are broken up in pieces, but the whole thing is still on our website, in addition to many, many more resources. As the years go on, teaching pedagogy also evolves, and so do more resources come to light. For instance, 10 years ago, in the 100th anniversary of the Armenian Genocide, we got many new Armenian Genocide survivor memoirs that were being translated to English now for the first time. Those are great resources for us. And new documentaries and movies and both nonfiction and fiction, historical fiction books came out that we can use as, so we're constantly evolving lesson plans and offering new ones. But this was that original. And our website, which is just the homepage you see here, genocideeducation.org, includes all of our lesson plans free for teachers to download. So resources are there. These have been vetted not just by California's upper level state Department of Education, but multiple other states' departments of education. We're just creating curriculum now that using this curriculum to match standards for Nevada, and we've done it for Michigan, we've done it for Rhode Island, we've done it for Massachusetts, Texas, their Commission for Holocaust and Genocide Education. So, so now these are available free for teachers. Just a look at some of our lesson plans. One based on the New York Times articles during the Armenian Genocide. New York Times extensively covered the Armenian Genocide while it was happening, and then it was very soon forgotten in education and news after that for 100 years. Lessons based on eyewitness testimony and photographs and videos, posters to put in the classroom. Another thing we're very proud of that we created during the 100th anniversary was a whole unit for teachers that can be used mostly also in US history about how the United States mounted the biggest ever humanitarian aid effort to help Armenian genocide survivors. And most Armenian Americans today are descendants of the survivors that the American Near East Relief Foundation helped survive as orphans and come here. So in that way, it's a very prideful moment for us to be able to teach about this topic and teach the American history connection to it. These are just various a lesson about the discovery by an Armenian botanist in Turkey before he was taken during the Armenian Genocide of a particular type of tulip. So we created a lesson about him and the Armenian Genocide and his survival, and these tulips that only survived because he saved the seeds and he sent them to the Netherlands so that they can plant them and put them in their tulip business. And so students then make their own tulips. And another big thing we do, and which it's why we're here in DC this week, we go to the conferences of social studies teachers around the country. And the biggest one is the National Council for the Social Studies. And they're having their conference right this weekend. And we're giving a workshop related to that. We put up our booth, we meet lots of teachers there, we offer them our materials, we give them sessions, 1 hour or 2 hour sessions, and when we can, every few years, we give a whole day, which was what we're doing tomorrow. And we go around the country giving our workshops. These are just scenes from those workshops. Interesting side note, this workshop, it's in, as you can see, a beautiful historic landmark, which was the Armenian Community Center in San Francisco. In the lead up to the Azerbaijan-Turkey attacks on the Armenian homeland of Artsakh in 2020, there were hate crimes all over the world against Armenians right before those attacks happened. And one of them was the complete burning down arson attack of this building you're looking at. It's where the Genocide Education Project houses its offices and where we give workshops in San Francisco. So we no longer have that space. And it still has, unfortunately, not been rebuilt. Students working with our lesson plans. And then lastly, our last program I want to tell you about is our biggest one and most effective one in terms of expanding this education as quickly as we can across the country, and it's called the Gen Ed Teacher Fellowship Program. We invite and select pretty carefully, right, Alex? We select pretty carefully 15 teachers, social studies teachers from around the country. And also English language arts teachers, a few of them, because, you know, if you remember in your English literature classes, often there were historical fiction or even memoirs about the Holocaust or other things. Well, now that we have a good stash of high school appropriate Armenian genocide memoirs, we have been moving much more assertively in letting English literature teachers know about the resources we have that they can use. They might want to choose one of these memoirs for one of the 4 or 5 books that students read during the year. So we take these selected 15 each year for the past 4 years. We're about to start our 5th year to Armenia for an intensive 10-day teacher training workshop, where we've learned that the most effective way for teachers to be trained, but also the most effective way for them to get their students engaged, is to learn about who these people are. What's our culture? What's our civilization, which is quite ancient, as many of you might know? What are the key components of that culture that made us want to survive for 4 generations after we were almost completely wiped out? That gets students very engaged, and we can only do that in Armenia. And we partner with the only Armenian Genocide Museum that exists in the world in Yerevan, Armenia, the Armenian Genocide Museum Institute. In the mornings, teachers go there. Here's some scenes of our teachers walking through Armenia. They first get an overview of the capital. This is the Armenian Genocide Memorial in Armenia, in Yerevan, and next to it is that museum where they have sites for us to actually get down to business and give our workshops, and exhibits where they get a very specialized, teacher-targeted view of the exhibits. And Carrie, our executive director, runs the show there. That's her. And our board member, Dikran Kaligian, who's an Armenian history scholar, also is on hand. Our teachers, we also visit the American University of Armenia. It's the only American officially affiliated university that's there. And they have a human rights and genocide program that our teachers speak to those professors with, and they and also beginning last year, we're able to meet the students of that program, students who themselves are descendant from genocide survivors, whether it was 1915 genocide survivors or 2023 genocide survivors. And also last year, in addition to that, it was a student whose family had to flee the Syrian civil war and was now going to school there. So it's a very impactful, I mean, where can you get that kind of training anywhere else? They see the ancient manuscripts of Armenians. They see ancient manuscripts being renovated in Armenia. They get to do their own little manuscripts. They see ancient churches. They get to go down into a dungeon where the monk who brought Christianity to Armenia, as you may have been told by any Armenian you may ever have met, Armenians were the first to adopt Christianity. And so the guy who got the Armenians to adopt Christianity was first jailed for, depending on which grandma you talk to, 3 years or 13 years, down in this dungeon. So they get to go there. And other major sites that they see, activities that they do, they get a real feel. That's Mount Ararat in the background of our Armenian dance lesson for the teachers. They get their diploma, and that's our second group, 2023, I think it was. But then key to this program is the fact that these 15 teachers each year, when they return to their home state, they then give their own teacher training workshop for 20 other teachers. And that's the part, that multiplier effect, which I mentioned, has allowed us to reach many more teachers and consequently many more students than we could have ever done before by knocking on the doors of each individual school or school district. So these are our teacher fellows giving their presentations. These two gentlemen you see, the one in the far back and the other one on the right side, there are Gen Ed teacher fellows who team teach a comparative genocides course in the Boston area. And they've now given multiple Armenian genocide workshops partnering with us, and they're giving one here at the National Council for the Social Studies as well. And so I'll say my piece there. I just wanted to give you kind of an overview of the work that's already being done and the resources that are already been created. The thing that we strive for and make us so frustrated is that we want to do more, we want to do more. But with the private donations, mostly by Armenian Americans, that we can collect, so far this is as much as we can do. And it takes long to hit what do you call it, a number of people that then can jump off from there with that. As I said, before we started this last project, you know, for 20 years, we were knocking on doors, and you just don't make enough headway enough. It needs to be more standardized, but I feel like we've got a great head start in being ready to hit the ground running once we have the opportunity to do more.
Thank you so much, Roxanne. I think we'll pass over to our next guests, and we'll go from there. Unless there are any questions, I mean, we are in a roundtable format right now, so I feel like it would be fair if there are media questions, but otherwise, let's move on.
Okay. So I'm Carrie. I was in the classroom for 25 years in Missouri, in a rural part of Missouri outside of the St. Louis side. And I worked and lived in a not very diverse community. Not that it just, my students didn't really know other types of people. They hadn't met anybody of Jewish descent. They certainly hadn't met an Armenian. And so what I want to kind of talk to you about today is what it takes to do the education piece for genocide. Because as Roxanne was pointing out, like, we've done these great programs as Gen Ed, but in many states they will pass a mandate for teaching a certain genocide or even the Armenian case, and they won't fund it. That doesn't do much good. I'm sorry, that's probably a little blunt. It's a great thought, but if you don't train teachers how to teach about genocide, you're going to get very poor results. You're going to get results you didn't want, because teaching about genocide is teaching the human story. This isn't like your history class where you can just memorize dates and places and move on. This is about people, the impact and the power of the story and the experience, like Roxanne's family. And coming full circle into the American communities. And that's that piece. We have so many ways to approach this story with American exceptionalism, with the Near East Relief Foundation and the work that they did, and how everyday Americans engaged in this. But also just looking at the impact. Like, what does denial do to people, whether they're Armenian, they're Holocaust or Rwandan, or they're Tutsi in the Rwandan case. This is very, very important, and you need a very specific pedagogy to teach this effectively. I started my career in some different even smaller communities, and I really became interested in teaching night, which many of you, I'm assuming, in your high schools probably have some experience with. And so that led me to teaching about genocide, and I had to go seek that out. I had to seek out the training I needed. Luckily, we had a really great museum in St. Louis, and so I would do my Holocaust training there, and eventually it led to a fellowship here in DC. And what I discovered was that it wasn't enough to just teach one story, because the Holocaust is very important, and we should teach it. And we should also teach other stories. And so teaching 8th grade literature, I would teach a genocide unit using different memoir pieces and survivor accounts. And I would always teach Armenia and the Holocaust, and then I would kind of alternate between Bosnia and Rwanda and the Tutsi in Rwanda, and just being careful. So, you know, one of the most mindful things when you're teaching 8th graders, it has to be appropriate. And some of these things that happen are obviously horrific, and I don't want to send my students home with this horror. That's not appropriate. But I learned that by seeking out that professional development. This bill is going to help fund that professional development so that teachers aren't paying to improve themselves, to fulfill a mandate out of their own pockets. Because some will. I mean, we are probably those good examples. But most teachers are not in that position to do it. And so if we want them to deliver the very best, we have to put the money up. And so one of the things that I'm really excited about with this bill is that it is funding the initiative, that it will support teachers teaching these very important stories, this very important history, because we know genocide didn't end at the Holocaust. We also, sometimes you get students in the class who are like, there's other cases of genocide? I thought it was just the Holocaust. And that's unnerving. They need to know that it's not just this one incident. I taught a human rights and genocide course for years at my last building before I retired to become the education director, but it was a course I created. I wrote all my own curriculum. I curated all of my own materials. I spent a lot of my own time and money on it because that was my passion project. And I'm not mad about that, but that was my passion project. If we want to support teachers in those passion projects, we've got to fund it. So when I retired, this course, which was a semester long, it was very popular, there was always a wait list, was handed off to another teacher who did not have any training in it. He'd watched some movies. And I had a lot of misgivings about that. It lasted a year, and the course has since gone away. But the sunny side, I suppose, of that is that 30 minutes down the river, in another community where one of my former students is now teaching, who took my class, has started her own Holocaust and genocide class. So at least, you know, I feel like, okay, the passion, this is that special person. And because I have the knowledge of how to go out and get this professional development, I can support her, which is awesome. But how many of our teachers are in that position? As a young teacher, I mean, she's, I think, in her 5th year. She's got to have those connections in to be able to learn these things. And if we don't fund and support that, we're going to miss out on these opportunities to really create more culturally aware students, more globally informed students, more engaged students. And I think that is just such a shame if we miss out on this opportunity.
Now, please go ahead.
So I do teach in Fairfax County, so it's about a 45-minute metro ride if you want to get to my school. And I am very lucky that I am in a very diverse county, right? My school has kids that come directly from other countries every single day. We have somebody transferring in, it feels like. And so I am one of those teachers that tries to incorporate all stories into my classroom because it's important that the kids see other people, right? They don't just see British, they don't just see the Spanish and the Portuguese as the entire year. And that's really what our standards look like in a lot of cases. And so I try to incorporate all the stories from all different areas of the world. And right now in the state of Virginia, the Armenian genocide is a single bullet point at the very bottom of the standards with 7 other genocides. So it is very bottom. And as a teacher, sometimes we might not get to that last bullet point because we have to teach 500 years of history in 9 months. And that is a lot of work, right? And so it's so important because the Armenian genocide is actually removed from its context within that bullet point. It's not taught with World War I, like the Holocaust is taught with World War II. Instead, it's just with China's revolution, and then you've got Cuba, it's just thrown in. And so for me, I want my students to see how to prevent genocide. And it's really no better than to study the Armenian genocide with this, because there was time and time again that other countries could have stepped in and really stopped the Armenian genocide from occurring. We have quotes from different politicians in the 1910s that said, "I see it's happening, but I'm trying to win a war. And we need the Ottoman Empire to try to win that war." And so there were times where we could have stepped in. And as she showed, there were New York Times clips, right, that showed we knew it was happening. And so I focus with my students a lot on prevention. And so we go through the 10 stages and I say, if you see this polarization, this classification of people, if you see the the violence that is occurring. How do you stop it? What can you do as future leaders, right? Because these kids are all growing up and they're about to take over the United States. They're the ones who are going to be making changes. So if they're able to step in and say, I can stop it in this way if I see this thing happening, right? Then they can stop genocides throughout the world. And since Armenia is one of the first ones in the 20th century on such a big scale, right? Millions of people, it leads to the other ones. In the Holocaust, we can see that they reference the Armenian genocide and say, well, if they got away with it, we can too. And so Armenia is really the basis of genocides in the 20th century. And if we can show how to stop it, we can really change the world and make it a better place. And I'm lucky that I was able to go on this project, even though I applied multiple times and they rejected me once.
You're better off for it, right?
Yeah.
I was.
Character building.
My people were great. This trip was something that I never really could have imagined. I have cousins who are descendants of Armenian genocide survivors. And so I was actually able to take the journal that my relative wrote while in the middle of the genocide and get it brought to the museum so that they are actually going to translate some of the stories his mom would tell him as he was little. And so it's really important to me and my family that these things do pass, but I do recognize that everybody else doesn't have the same resources that I was given, right? Going to Armenia was a dream I've had, and I'm very thankful it occurred. But not everyone's going to be able to do it. And living in Fairfax County, I was able to go to my public library right next to my school and get books on the Armenian genocide. Not every town is going to have a public library that's so stocked the research that's available to them. And so I'm very lucky in my 6th year of teaching that I was given this opportunity, that my school is now making the Armenian genocide not a single multiple choice question, and now it's a written response on the test. And so we're moving it to becoming more and more important. And I hope that everybody around the United States can have that same experience and get that same education that they deserve and that Armenia deserves.
Thank you all so much for sharing your experience. I think it's only, I think, in part the importance and the imperative of having a system to scale the work that's already being done. And I think about this in terms of both the continuation or the process of repetition, but also in continuation, because I think one thing that we don't recognize often or don't speak about enough is that the Armenian genocide never really ended, and it's not in the abstract in terms of how it continued in Artsakh in a different form. It's also in that today we have, of course, denial in Turkey, so Turkey does not recognize its role in the genocide or that the genocide happened. The ongoing destruction and desecration of Armenian cultural heritage in Western Armenia, what is today Eastern Turkey. It is the ongoing repression that Armenians feel in Turkey and this inability to reckon with their own place in Turkish society because they face repression and discrimination and these age-old hatreds that were institutionalized and systematized in Turkey. And we see in Azerbaijan today, for example, how systematic and institutionalized anti-Armenian hatred is in the way that it's propagated by all levels of Azerbaijani government and civil society. And then you look at the way in which the US has sort of perpetuated that by kowtowing to Turkish denialism. And it's more about than just the denial of history, denial of historic reality. There are practical implications, which is that in turning a blind eye to Turkey's historic abuses and aggression, we've also turned a blind eye to its current and contemporary abuses and aggression. Well, we're far more reticent to hold Turkey accountable for, say, the invasion of Syria because we're worried that any little red line or tripwire we step over is going to create some sort of geopolitical emergency, right? So we can't even rein in Turkey as an ally on this issue, and as a result, it sort of metastasizes in an ability to speak truth to our reliable NATO allies, generally speaking. And even within Turkey, Armenian genocide denial was sort of a progenitor for the denial of free speech and the crackdowns on civil society. And it is very often you see the Turkish government label dissidents as pro-Armenian figures or just Armenians, right? And that's been a way to sort of the consolidation of regime control domestically in Turkey as well. So outside of our need to reckon and ensure some element of historic justice 100 years later, we also have to think about how genocide denial is manifested in these very, very dangerous ways within Turkey, within the community of Armenians that still live in Turkey, with the heritage that Armenians are now facing further loss of 100 years later, but also the geopolitical implications of like our failure and refusal as the US to call a spade a spade. So these, I think, are all things that we look at today that connect very clearly to what happened in Artsakh, and all the more important now that we've seen Trump refuse recognition of the genocide. So President Trump refused to use the word genocide after President Biden took that step back in 2021, and we consider that a very dangerous and reckless reversal and a very worrying sign of things to come, because if we are now walking back a position on this issue, how much more are we willing to walk back when it comes to our ability to rein Turkey in? So with all of that said, the bill, as I mentioned, we have 62 co-sponsors on it right now, which is fantastic. In terms of its mechanics, it would seek to provide $10 million in funding to the Library of Congress or a similar institute, such as maybe one of the Smithsonian institutes, to give access to schools and teachers to full resources, develop curriculum material, and then teach across the country. Though we are now looking at ways we might refine elements of the bill, because we realize that GenEd, the Genocide Education Project, has already done and is doing a lot of the work that the bill would seek to authorize, has already done this successfully and helped implement in places like California and now Nevada. And we maybe don't need to build up that infrastructure. What we need is to provide resources to the teachers who are already doing this work, not reinvent the wheel, but give people what they need in order to scale this incredibly important work. So one thing we're looking at now is how maybe instead of having this be a federal program, it's a federal grant that organizations engaged in genocide education can apply for, tap into, and utilize to give more autonomy and agency to the teachers and the organizations already doing this work, and also to overcome some of the maybe political obstacles that may come with federally mandated funding for education programs, which we know can be a contentious issue. Though I will say this is not a mandate, it's not an educational mandate, it's a funding authorization. So it does give schools and state jurisdictions, autonomy. But the idea would be create a resource that those who need those resources can tap into and use and expand the incredible work that's already been done. I want to open for questions. If anyone has anything they'd like to ask, I do have one that I'd like to sort of set the stage with, but I think numbers help visualize the extent of work that's done. So how many people have gone through the teacher fellowship programs? How many workshops or teacher training sessions have been held? What's the kind of stock of resources now? Because it seems like you're doing an incredible amount of work with a shoestring budget, and I think it goes to show that funding sources like this could exponentially increase the volume and output. But I'd love to hear about what's the state of play.
Thank you. So far, in the 4 years that we've been taking our teachers to our fellowship program, we now have 34, I think the count is 34 teacher fellows. 60 teacher fellows covering 34 US states. We hope we can get to 50, but some of those states are hard to crack and don't have as much population for us to. Yes, let's go. So, right, so 60 teachers, 34 states. Now, the way the algorithm that my nephew, who got his degree in mathematics, figured out for me, pro bono, was that when he figured out, okay, how many students, all these teachers getting trained, what result of numbers of students will be reached. Yeah. So you've got 15 teachers the first year that you take to Armenia. Each of those 15 teach about 100 new students each year, right? And they're not going to stop the first year. They're going to keep going. They're going to put, now they learned how to do this. It's a set part of their curriculum. So you've got all of those. But then each of those 15 that year are going to be training 20 others. And each of those 20 have another 100 students that they're teaching just in their just in 1 year, and then another 100 and another 100. So exponentially, the number of students that are getting this education each year really jumps up every year a lot. So we're going on year 5. By year 7.5, the algorithm tells me we're going to reach over 1 million students. So that's really good in just a few years. And so as far as workshops are concerned, I think we did a count of several thousand, at least, workshops that we've done till now. And you asked one more metric question. What was it? A number of workshops, number of teachers.
No, I think that more or less comes. Put it in really crude terms.
Yeah.
It's an incredible return on investment, right? and I think it goes to show that even the very modest funding that this bill would allocate, $10 million, right? Which is very modest in the scheme of U.S. budgets, would go an incredibly long way.
In our 25 years, we've never had. So. Cumulatively.
I'll turn to the room if there are any questions about the work that Gen Ed does, or the Genocide Education Act, or next steps, or any thoughts or comments would be appreciated. Otherwise, we can bring things to a close and maybe have informal. Please go ahead, on.
First of all, ground zero for genocide education is the Bay Area, not just because of Gen Ed, but also the speaker who brought it before was the Bay Area. But the resolution that did pass the House, almost unanimously, the Senate unanimously, right, the resolve clauses did mention we need to see education on the Armenian genocide and also genocide of the Greeks, the Syrians, and Chaldeans and others. So this is the logical next step, essentially called for in the unanimous passage of the genocide resolution. It's a logical next step. And all workers, as Alex said, by the current president not using the phrase Armenian genocide. So this is really, it makes sense. It's the next logical step. And we look forward to this passage.
Any questions? You guys are a lot younger than I am. Did any of you learn about the Armenian genocide in your high school curriculum? Yes.
Wow, awesome.
It's getting around. Good.
And how many of those hands were from California?
Oh.
Or
Good point.
Massachusetts.
More than
yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
I think that's actually one of the things that struck me about the numbers was the extent that the states reached. 34 states, which is fantastic, because we've had these great hubs and epicenters in LA and SF, Boston, Watertown, New York for so long, but it's good to see it reaching Missouri.
Virginia, Missouri, I'm so thrilled about that. Yeah.
Like when we go to Armenia, how touched the Armenian people are that these non-Armenians care about teaching about this topic. They really do have that, like, wow, like somebody's actually listening to us.
Yeah. And I do want to point out, I appreciate that some of you have been taught about the Armenian genocide, which is awesome. But when I go into a lot of teacher workshops, I run into a lot of teachers who they're social studies teachers. Like, this is their educational training, and they haven't heard about it. So, I mean, it's an entire system in some areas. In some areas, we're doing it right, obviously. But in many areas, especially where we don't have Armenian populations, they just don't have that connection.
I'd actually like to pose a question. So I come from a state that has a very small Armenian population, the state of Georgia.
Oh, okay.
My world history class was actually a very rare case that was taught by a person who knew about the Armenian genocide, and it was actually an AP class. So does the Genocide Education Project work? Will it work with the college board to implement Armenian genocide education in AP history classes?
That's a great project. We will. If we have the resources and the manpower to do it, we will. We've started reaching more and more college professors, and college professors have reached out to us and said, so most of my students are coming from high school without any experience with this topic. So your high school lessons still work very well with my first year, second year college students. So I'm using your lessons, and so we've heard from that, and we've been reaching we've been reaching out. We've got a list of like history and professors at colleges, but we haven't taken that leap with the AP college, the college boards that deal with AP, and that would be a great thing to do. Well, we got to add it to our list and see who can run that program with us. Because if I ask her to do one more thing, she's going to escape.
No, but I think you had an exceptional teacher.
Yes.
Because it's not required to be taught in the AP course, but your teacher chose that. And I think that really is significant for just acknowledging your teacher's exception. I know that you can, like teachers can teach it. It's just, it would be nice to be able to work with the College Board to say, put this on an assessment, put this on one of your AP tests. We're slowly making those inroads, but we as a larger community, Gen Ed is part of a larger community, but it is, yeah, that's awesome though. That's really.
And now that we've got a foundation of a few years of our Gen Ed teacher fellows, we're in continuous touch with them. And virtually all of them have agreed after their year of training other teachers to stay along with us, and we can call on them to give presentations where we need in their state or at their conference, and also to communicate on Gen Ed's behalf with their state departments of education. I think that would be a great project to ask if one of our Gen Ed teacher fellows, because we've got, I would say, at least a third or a half of our teacher fellows that we've taken to Armenia also teach community college or college courses on the side, so they could be a good conduit. Thank you.
Well, if there are no other questions, thank you so much, Roxanne, Carrie, Alex, for taking the time to be here and speak with us today. Please, if you have any follow-up questions, you can send them our way to the ANCA. We're happy to answer. We're happy to connect